The shrill cry of a baby pierced the still desert air as Delia Jennings stood alone at the dusty crossroads, a threadbare dress fluttering against her skin in the merciless Nevada wind. Spring of 1876 had never felt so cruel. The stagecoach that had abandoned her at the outskirts of Ely was now just a distant cloud of dust on the horizon, carrying with it the man who had promised her the world but left her with nothing but heartbreak. "Hush now, little one," she whispered, gently bouncing her 2-month-old son against her chest. The infant's wails subsided momentarily as she adjusted the worn cotton sling that held him close. Her fingers trembled as she counted the few coins remaining in her pocket, not enough for a room, barely enough for a meal. Ely, Nevada territory stretched before her, a scattered collection of wooden buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. The mining town had grown rapidly in the last few years, but to Delia it looked like the end of the earth rather than a new beginning. "Madam, you planning on standing there till sundown?" The voice startled her. Rough and deep, it belonged to a tall man astride a chestnut mare. His face was partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his hat, but she could see the sun-weathered skin around his eyes, the days-old stubble covering a strong jaw. "I'm just catching my breath," Delia replied, lifting her chin despite the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. The cowboy's gaze traveled from her face to the bundle against her chest, then to the small carpet bag at her feet, her only possession aside from the faded blue dress she wore. "Looks like you've been left with a baby and a dress," he observed bluntly. Then, with a hint of cruel amusement, he added, "Looks like you've got all you need now." Delia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. "I don't recall asking for your assessment, sir." A spark of something, perhaps respect, flickered in his eyes. He dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his tall frame. "Name's Brent Mackenzie, town sheriff." He touched the badge pinned to his leather vest. "And you'd be Delia Jennings," she replied, hesitating before adding, "from Boston." Sheriff Mackenzie let out a low whistle. "You're a long way from home, Miss Jennings." "Mrs. Jennings," she corrected automatically, though the title felt hollow on her tongue. Harold had married her in a quick ceremony when her condition became apparent, only to abandon her 5 months later with promises to send for her once he struck it rich in the silver mines. The stagecoach driver had confirmed what she already suspected: no one by Harold's name had been seen in Ely for months. "Well, Mrs. Jennings, Ely isn't kind to women alone." The sheriff's tone had softened slightly. "Especially not ones with babes." "I'm aware of the challenges," she said, though in truth, she had grossly underestimated what awaited her in the West. Boston had been restrictive with its social hierarchies and judgments, but at least there had been charitable organizations, women's aid societies. Here, the barren landscape seemed to mirror the emptiness of her prospects. The baby began to fuss again, his tiny face reddening with the effort. Delia rocked him gently, but his cries grew more insistent. "When did you last feed him?" Sheriff Mackenzie asked, his brow furrowing. "This morning," she admitted. The journey was longer than expected. Something shifted in the sheriff's expression, pity perhaps, or a decision being made. "Come with me," he said gruffly. "Mrs. Wallace at the boarding house might have a room. And my deputy's wife just had a little one, she might spare some milk." "I can't accept charity," Delia said, even as her legs nearly buckled with fatigue. "It's not charity, it's common decency." He picked up her carpetbag with one hand and offered his other arm for support. "And you can work it off. Town's growing. Always need for honest help." The weight of her situation crashed down upon her. Delia had arrived in Ely with plans to reunite with her husband, to begin their life together in a new town full of opportunity. Instead, she was alone, reliant on the grudging kindness of a stranger who had just insulted her. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said finally, her voice barely audible above her son's cries. As they walked toward town, Delia felt the stares of passers-by, curious, judgmental, speculative. She held her head high, though each step into Ely felt like marching toward an uncertain sentence rather than salvation. Sheriff Mackenzie led her to a two-story clapboard building with a hand-painted sign. Wallace Boarding House. It was modest but neat, with curtains in the windows and a small porch lined with rocking chairs. "Martha," he called as they entered. "Got someone who needs a room." A plump woman with gray-streaked hair appeared from the back, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression was guarded until she saw the baby. "Oh, the poor little mite," she said, her demeanor instantly softening. "Bring them in, Brent. Quickly now." Within an hour, Delia found herself in a small but clean room on the second floor. Her son, William Billy, as she called him, was contentedly nursing from a bottle provided by Jenny Miller, the deputy's wife who had arrived with remarkable speed after Sheriff Mackenzie sent word. "He's taking to it well," Jenny commented, watching the infant's vigorous feeding. She was a young woman, perhaps only a year or two older than Delia's 21 years, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. "Boys are usually such greedy little things." "I can't thank you enough," Delia said, emotion thickening her voice. "Nonsense. We women must help each other out here." Jenny smoothed her skirt. "The West isn't Boston or New York. Out here, you survive by leaning on others when needed." Martha Wallace appeared in the doorway with a tray bearing bread, cheese, and a steaming cup of tea. "You'll stay the week," she announced, brooking no argument. "Sheriff Mackenzie has seen to it." "He's paid for my room?" Delia asked, alarmed at being indebted to the brash lawman. "Not exactly," Martha replied, "but he's arranged for you to help at the schoolhouse. Teacher needs an assistant with all the new families arriving for the mines." "You can read and write, I assume?" "Yes, of course. I was educated at Miss Pembroke's Academy in Boston." Delia felt a flicker of hope. Teaching was respectable work, something she had considered before her hasty marriage. "Good, you start Monday." Martha set down the tray. "Eat now. You look ready to collapse." After the women left, Delia settled Billy in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer lined with blankets. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, finally allowing herself to weep quietly. Tears of exhaustion, relief, humiliation, and grief flowed freely as she confronted the reality of her situation. She was 21, widowed, or good as given Harold's disappearance, with an infant son in a frontier town thousands of miles from home. The life she had imagined for herself, married to a successful businessman, raising children in a proper Boston home, had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh western sun. Yet as she wiped away her tears and sipped the strong, sweet tea Martha had provided, Delia felt an unexpected steeliness forming within her. She would not become a cautionary tale, a tragic figure to be pitied. She would find her way, for Billy's sake if not for her own. Outside her window, the main street of Ely bustled with activity. Men in dusty clothes moved between saloons and stores. A wagon loaded with timber rolled past, presumably bound for one of the new buildings rising on the outskirts. Life here moved at a different rhythm than Boston Rower, more immediate. Just as she was about to close the curtains, she spotted Sheriff Mackenzie emerging from his office across the street. He paused on the boardwalk, lighting a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his features. Without the shadow of his hat, he appeared younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a straight nose and surprisingly full lips beneath his mustache. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up toward her window. Delia quickly stepped back, embarrassed to be caught staring. But in that brief moment of connection, she'd glimpsed something in his expression beyond the dismissive assessment he'd offered at the crossroads: interest, curiosity, perhaps even concern. Delia shook her head at such fanciful thoughts. Sheriff Mackenzie had merely done his duty, ensuring a stranded woman and child weren't left to fend for themselves. Nothing more. Yet as she prepared for bed, washing with the water provided in a chipped porcelain basin, Delia found herself considering the sheriff's words at their first meeting. She did have her baby and her dress, the two things that defined her current state. One, a responsibility that anchored her to this world when she might otherwise have surrendered to despair. The other, a symbol of how little she possessed, how vulnerable her position. Perhaps, in his blunt way, Sheriff Mackenzie had spoken a truth she needed to hear. She had been stripped down to essentials, and from this bare beginning she would have to build anew. Dawn broke clear and bright over Ely the next morning. Delia woke to Billy's hungry cries, feeling stiff from the unfamiliar mattress but more rested than she had been in weeks. After feeding him with milk Martha had left in a covered jar, she dressed in the same blue calico dress, her only garment aside from underclothes and a shawl. "We'll need to find you some proper clothes," Martha declared when Delia ventured downstairs. The boarding house dining room was filled with the aroma of coffee and bacon. "Can't have the schoolchildren's assistant wearing the same dress day after day." "I have no money for new clothes," Delia admitted, her cheeks warming. "The mercantile takes trade," Martha said, setting a plate before her. "You've got fine hands, do you sew?" "Yes, quite well. My mother insisted." "Good, sewing's valued here, not enough women with the skill." Martha poured coffee into a chipped cup. "Finish your breakfast, then we'll see Mrs. Parker at the general store." The town looked different in daylight, smaller than it had seemed yesterday, yet more vibrant. Wooden buildings lined the main street, their facades bearing optimistic signs. Ely Assay Office, Silver State Bank, Franklin's Dry Goods and Mercantile. Between the established businesses stood newer structures, some still under construction, evidence of the town's growth following silver discoveries in the surrounding hills. Women were scarce on the streets, Delia noticed. Those she did see moved with purpose, dressed practically in calico dresses and sturdy boots, their hair simply arranged beneath bonnets or scarves. They nodded respectfully to Martha and regarded Delia with undisguised curiosity. "News travels fast," Martha murmured. "By now everyone knows about the Boston lady with the baby." At Franklin's Mercantile, Delia met Mrs. Parker, a thin woman with shrewd eyes and capable hands. "Martha tells me you sew," she said without preamble. "Show me." Delia was directed to a corner where Mrs. Parker was mending a shirt. Taking needle and thread, Delia demonstrated her even stitches, the neat buttonhole technique her mother had drilled into her. Mrs. Parker nodded, satisfied. "I can use help with alterations. Minors don't care what they wear, but the business owners' wives are getting particular. Want Eastern styles?" She looked Delia up and down. "We'll trade. 2 work dresses and a Sunday best for 2 days work weekly." "That's very generous," Delia began, but Mrs. Parker waved away her gratitude. "Not generous, practical. Can't have a teacher's assistant looking shabby. Reflects poorly on the town." With the arrangement made, Delia selected fabric for 2 serviceable dresses, one brown, one dark green, and was measured for alterations to a ready-made blue dress suitable for church. "You'll need to meet Miss Spencer at the schoolhouse," Martha said as they left the store. "She's expecting you." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a single-room building with a small bell tower. Inside, rows of crude desks faced a blackboard. A slender woman with wire-rimmed spectacles was writing arithmetic problems when they entered. "Miss Spencer, this is Mrs. Jennings, your new assistant," Martha announced. Harriet Spencer was perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She assessed Delia quickly. "You have teaching experience." "I tutored younger students at my academy," Delia replied. "And your child, his name is William. He's 2 months old." Miss Spencer frowned. "Babies and education don't mix well." "I've offered to mind him during school hours," Martha interjected. "Already discussed it with Sheriff Mackenzie." Miss Spencer's expression softened slightly at the mention of the sheriff. "Very well. We have 38 pupils currently, ages 5 to 15. Most leave schooling by 12 to work. Can you handle mathematics?" "Through basic algebra and geometry," Delia confirmed. "Good, the older boys need instruction there. I'll handle reading, writing, and history." She paused. "Your accent marks you as educated. The children will notice. Some parents may resent it." "I understand," Delia said, though she wasn't sure she did. "Start Monday, 7 o'clock sharp." Miss Spencer turned back to her blackboard, clearly considering the interview concluded. As they walked back to the boarding house, Delia felt overwhelmed by how quickly her life was being arranged. "Everyone seems so efficient," she commented. Martha chuckled. "Frontier living doesn't allow for dithering. Problems need solving directly." She patted Delia's arm. "Don't worry, you'll adjust." They turned a corner and nearly collided with Sheriff Mackenzie. He steadied Martha with a hand on her elbow. "Ladies," he greeted them, tipping his hat. His eyes lingered on Delia. "How's the little one?" "Sleeping with Mrs. Miller," Delia replied. "Thank you for arranging everything, Sheriff." He shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Town needs a teacher's assistant. You need work. Simple math." Martha glanced between them with a knowing look. "I've got bread in the oven. Delia, don't rush back." With that transparent excuse, she bustled away. An awkward silence fell. Delia was acutely aware of her wrinkled dress and hair hastily pinned beneath her bonnet. "Been to the schoolhouse?" he asked finally. "Yes. Miss Spencer seems exacting. Harriet's strict but fair. Came from Philadelphia 3 years ago when we advertised for a teacher." He fell into step beside her, shortening his stride to match hers. "You'll do fine." "I'm not certain of that," Delia admitted. "Everything here is so different from Boston." "Different how?" he asked, seeming genuinely curious. "In Boston there are structures, social expectations, clear paths." She gestured around them. "Here everything feels provisional, unfinished." "That's because it is." His voice held a note of pride. 5 years ago, Ely was just a way station. Now we've got a bank, church, school. In 5 more years, who knows? You've been here that long, since '71. Came to keep order during the first silver rush. He guided her around a muddy patch in the road. "What brought you west, if you don't mind my asking?" "Husband in the mines." Delia stiffened. "Something like that." Sheriff Mackenzie's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't press. "Well, whatever your reasons, Ely can be a good place to start over. Town's growing. Needs people willing to put down roots." They reached the boarding house steps. Delia turned to face him, noting how the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. "Why are you helping me, Sheriff?" "You don't know me." "Part of my job," he replied, but something in his expression suggested there was more. After a moment, he added, "I've seen too many women abandoned out here. Most end up in saloons or worse. You seem—" He paused, searching for words. "You've got grit beneath those proper Boston manners." Delia wasn't sure whether to be flattered or offended. "Thank you, I think." It was meant as a compliment, he assured her. "Grit's valuable currency in Nevada." He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Mrs. Jennings." As he strode away, Delia found herself watching the confident set of his shoulders. the easy way he greeted townspeople as he passed. Sheriff Mackenzie was nothing like the refined gentleman of her Boston circle. He was direct to the point of bluntness, rough-edged, commanding. Yet there was something compelling about his straightforward manner. She shook her head at her foolish thoughts. Her situation was far too precarious to entertain any notions about the sheriff or any man. Her focus needed to be on establishing herself and caring for Billy. Still, as she entered the boarding house, she couldn't help but reflect on their conversation. The sheriff had spoken of Ely as a place to put down roots. After months of uncertainty, the idea of stability even in this dusty frontier town held undeniable appeal. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Parker delivered the promised dresses, which fit Delia well enough after minor adjustments. Martha introduced her to several townspeople, including the preacher and his wife, who welcomed her warmly to Sunday services. Billy was passed around among the church ladies, each offering advice on teething, colic, and proper swaddling techniques. Delia observed with amusement how these frontier women, some barely literate, spoke with absolute authority on child rearing, dismissing her Eastern notions with good-natured scoffs. Sheriff Mackenzie attended the service as well, sitting at the back of the church with several other men. He nodded to Delia but kept his distance, his expression unreadable beneath his respectfully doffed hat. Monday arrived with a knot of anxiety in Delia's stomach. She fed Billy early, dressed in her new brown dress, and carried him to Martha's kitchen. "He'll be fine," Martha assured her, taking the infant with practiced ease. "You focus on those children. First impressions matter." The schoolhouse was already filling with pupils when Delia arrived. They fell silent as she entered, 38 pairs of eyes assessing the newcomer. Their clothing reflected Ely's diverse population. Some wore neat, if mended attire, while others were dressed in rough homespun or hand-me-downs several sizes too large. Miss Spencer introduced her briskly. "This is Mrs. Jennings from Boston. She'll be assisting with mathematics and helping the younger students with their letters. You will show her the same respect you show me." A murmur ran through the room at the mention of Boston. Delia saw curiosity, suspicion, and in some of the older girls' faces, a hint of wistful admiration. The morning proceeded more smoothly than Delia had anticipated. She worked with a group of 8-year-olds on their multiplication tables, while Miss Spencer drilled the older students on American history. The children were generally respectful, if occasionally distracted by the spring weather visible through the windows. During the noon break, as the students ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Miss Spencer offered an assessment. "You have a natural way with the younger ones," she observed. "And you caught Thomas Jackson's arithmetic error without embarrassing him. Well done." "Thank you," Delia replied, surprised by the praise. "Don't thank me yet." Miss Spencer's tone remained businesslike. "The real test will be the Caldwell boys this afternoon. 14 and 15, too big for school, but their father insists. They resent being here, especially being taught by women." The Caldwell brothers proved as challenging as predicted. Tall, sullen boys with the muscled arms of those already working in the mines part-time. They slouched at their desks and muttered comments, just quiet enough that Delia couldn't justifiably reprimand them. When she asked Jacob, the elder, to solve an equation on the blackboard, he smirked at his brother. "Don't see why I need this fancy learning when I'm making $2 a day already." "Mathematics will help you ensure you're being paid fairly for your labor," Delia replied evenly. "Unless you trust the mine owners to calculate your wages without error." A few students snickered. Jacob flushed but approached the blackboard. His solution was correct, if arrived at by a roundabout method. Delia praised his work while gently demonstrating a more efficient approach. By dismissal time, Delia's throat was dry and her feet ached, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. Even the Caldwell boys had grudgingly engaged with her lesson by the end. "You survived," Miss Spencer remarked as they straightened the classroom. "Better than most would have on their first day." "The children are eager to learn," Delia said. "Even those who pretend otherwise. Some are. Others are here because Nevada territory law requires it." Miss Spencer adjusted her spectacles. "But perhaps you're right. There's potential in most of them if we can keep them in school long enough." As Delia gathered her shawl to leave, Miss Spencer added, "Sheriff Mackenzie asked about you." Delia stilled. "What did he want to know? How you fared today?" A hint of amusement crossed the teacher's usually stern face. "He's not typically so interested in educational matters. He's simply being considerate after helping me find employment," Delia said, perhaps too quickly. "Of course." Miss Spencer's tone suggested she thought otherwise. "Brent Mackenzie is a good man, one of the few in these parts who values education and civility." She began erasing the blackboard. "He was married once, you know, years ago before coming west." Delia hadn't known and found herself unreasonably curious. "What happened to his wife?" "Influenza took her and their child." Miss Spencer's voice softened. "He doesn't speak of it, but Martha remembers when he arrived. Said he was running from ghosts." The information cast the sheriff in a new light. His gruff demeanor, his immediate concern for Billy, perhaps these stemmed from his own loss. Delia felt a pang of empathy for the man who had initially seemed so judgmental of her situation. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. "I'm not one for gossip," Miss Spencer replied, "but in a small town like Ely, it helps to understand the histories we all carry." Delia pondered this as she walked back to the boarding house. The neat grid of Ely's streets belied the tangled stories of its inhabitants. Each person she passed had come here for reasons of their own, seeking fortune, fleeing failure, chasing dreams, or escaping nightmares. She found Billy contentedly sleeping in Martha's parlor, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world around him. Gathering him into her arms, Delia felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. Whatever happened, she would ensure her son had opportunities she herself had lost. "Sheriff Mackenzie stopped by," Martha informed her, eyes twinkling. "Wanted to know how your first day went. Told him he should ask you himself." "Mrs. Wallace, you're worse than the church ladies," Delia scolded, but couldn't help smiling. "Just observing that our sheriff seems mighty concerned with your welfare," Martha replied innocently. "And that you could do worse than a man with a steady job and his own house." "I'm not looking for a husband," Delia stated firmly. "I had one. It didn't end well." Martha's expression grew serious. "Is he truly gone? Or might he return?" Delia hesitated. She hadn't spoken of Harold to anyone in Ely, preferring to let people assume she was widowed. "He abandoned us in Sacramento," she admitted finally. "Said he was coming to Ely to establish us a home, but when I arrived—" She shrugged, the pain still raw. "The stagecoach driver had never heard of him. Coward," Martha pronounced. "Better to know now than waste more years." "Perhaps." Delia stroked Billy's downy head. "But I can't help wondering if something happened to him. Harold was weak in many ways, but he seemed to care for us." "Men who care don't leave their wives and babes alone in strange cities," Martha said firmly. "But if it eases your mind, ask the sheriff to inquire. If your husband passed through Ely, someone would remember." The suggestion took root in Delia's mind. Knowing for certain what had happened to Harold would help her move forward, whatever the truth might be. The opportunity came the following evening. Delia had just settled Billy after his feeding when a knock sounded at her door. Sheriff Mackenzie stood in the hallway, hat in hand. "Mrs. Jennings," he greeted her. "Hope I'm not disturbing you, not at all." She stepped back, inviting him into her small room, then immediately wondered at the propriety of entertaining a man alone. But this was Ely, not Boston, and the sheriff was hardly a social caller. He remained standing, seeming too large for the modest space. "Heard your first day at the school went well. Even managed the Caldwell boys. News travels quickly," she observed. "Small town." He glanced at Billy sleeping in his drawer bed. "Little one doing all right, growing stronger every day." Delia gathered her courage. "Sheriff, I wanted to ask a favor. If I can help, I will." She explained about Harold, his promise to establish them in Ely, his failure to send word. "I need to know if he was ever here," she concluded, "for my peace of mind and for Billy's future." Sheriff Mackenzie's expression had darkened during her recounting. "What's his full name?" "Harold Thomas Jennings. He's 32, medium height, with light brown hair and a small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident." The sheriff nodded. "I'll ask around. Mining camps, saloons. If he passed through, someone will remember." He hesitated. "Mrs. Jennings, Delia, I should warn you. Men come west with big dreams. Some find silver, most find disappointment. Disappointment leads to drinking, gambling, trouble. You think he met with foul play?" Delia had considered this possibility during sleepless nights. Or he's working an anonymous claim somewhere. The sheriff's tone suggested he thought this less likely. Or he moved on to the next boom town. There's a new strike near Austin every month, it seems. "I understand," Delia said quietly. "I just need to know whether to hope for his return or accept that my son and I are truly on our own." Something flickered in Sheriff Mackenzie's eyes, compassion, perhaps, or admiration for her pragmatism. "I'll do what I can," he promised. "And Delia, whatever happened to your husband, you're making a place for yourself here. That takes courage." After he left, Delia sat on the edge of her bed, strangely moved by his words. The sheriff had called her courageous when she had felt nothing but fear and desperation since Harold's departure. Perhaps viewing her actions through another's eyes allowed her to see strength where she had perceived only necessity. Spring progressed into early summer. Delia settled into the rhythm of school days, growing more confident in her teaching abilities. Billy thrived under Martha's care, achieving each small milestone with determined focus that made Delia laugh with recognition. "Stubborn as his mama," Martha would say approvingly. Sheriff Mackenzie Brent, as she'd begun to think of him, made discreet inquiries about Harold but reported no definitive news. "No one matching his description has registered a claim or been arrested," he told her one evening as they sat on Martha's porch. "But that's not unusual. Men use different names out here, especially if they are running from something." "Harold wasn't running from anything except responsibility," Delia said with uncharacteristic bitterness. 6 weeks of uncertainty had worn away her charitable interpretations of her husband's absence. Brent studied her in the fading light. "Would you want him back? If he appeared tomorrow," the question startled her. She had been so focused on discovering Harold's fate that she hadn't considered how she would respond to his return. "I don't know," she admitted. "For Billy's sake, perhaps. But for myself." She trailed off, unwilling to articulate the growing realization that her marriage had been based more on social expectation than love. "You deserve better than a man who abandoned you," Brent said quietly. Their eyes met, and Delia felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with Harold. In the weeks since her arrival in Ely, she had come to know Brent Mackenzie as more than the gruff sheriff who had mockingly assessed her situation at the crossroads. He was a man of principle, respected if not always liked for his strict enforcement of the law. He read voraciously, borrowing books from Miss Spencer's limited library. He played chess with Doc Williams on Sunday afternoons and always had a kind word for the children who ran wild through town. And increasingly, he found reasons to cross paths with Delia, delivering messages from Miss Spencer, checking whether she needed anything from the mercantile when he made his rounds, stopping by the schoolhouse to fix a broken window or loose floorboard. Martha noted these attentions with knowing smiles, but refrained from further matchmaking comments. Miss Spencer was less discreet. "The sheriff never attended our school recitations before you arrived," she remarked after Brent appeared at the end of term presentations. Delia deflected such observations, reminding herself that her situation remained precarious. Without confirmation of Harold's death, she was neither widow nor wife in any practical sense. And even if she were free, entering another relationship so quickly would invite gossip of the most damaging kind. Yet she couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse whenever Brent appeared, or the way their conversations flowed more naturally with each meeting. They had begun walking together on Sunday afternoons after church, ostensibly so Delia could become familiar with Ely and its surroundings. Billy would sleep contentedly in her arms or, as he grew more alert, watch the world with wide eyes from his carriage, a generous gift from the Ladies' Aid Society, who had adopted Delia as a project. During these walks, Brent spoke of his vision for Ely, a proper town with brick buildings instead of wooden structures, a real courthouse, perhaps even a territorial college someday. Delia shared memories of Boston's cultural refinements while acknowledging the constraints she had chafed under there. "Women have more freedom here," she observed as they watched a female shopkeeper haggling confidently with a supplier. "In Boston, she would need a male relative to conduct that business." "Necessity breeds change," Brent replied. "Can't have half the population sitting idle while there's work to be done," he grinned. "Though I've noticed you Boston ladies still insist on certain niceties. Miss Spencer nearly took my head off when I forgot to hold the schoolhouse door." Delia laughed. "Harriet believes frontier women can be strong without surrendering all claims to genteel treatment." "And you? What do you believe?" The question seemed to hold more weight than its surface simplicity suggested. Delia considered her answer carefully. "I believe that respect matters more than empty gestures, that actions reveal character more clearly than words." She glanced at him. "And that people can surprise you if you give them the chance." His eyes held hers for a moment too long to be casual. "You've certainly surprised this town, Mrs. Jennings." Before Delia could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the Silver Strike Saloon. Angry voices rose above the usual Saturday afternoon bustle. "Excuse me," Brent said, immediately alert. "Duty calls." He strode toward the disturbance, hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. Delia watched him go, admiring his confidence even as worry flickered through her. Violence was an accepted part of frontier life, but Brent faced it daily, wading into disputes between men made reckless by alcohol and desperation. She didn't see him again until the following day at church. He slipped in late, sporting a darkening bruise on his cheekbone. When she raised a questioning eyebrow after the service, he shrugged. "Mining dispute, nothing serious." "You should have Doc Williams look at that," she said, reaching up instinctively to touch the injury before catching herself. "It's just a bruise." His voice softened. "But thank you for your concern." They were interrupted by Billy's fussing. The 4-month-old had grown increasingly vocal, expressing his opinions with enthusiastic gurgles and occasional indignant squawks. "Someone has important things to say," Brent observed, smiling at the infant. "He's certainly developing his own personality," Delia agreed, bouncing Billy gently. "Martha says he has my determination and his father's charm." A shadow crossed Brent's face at the mention of Harold. "About your husband," he began, then glanced around at the churchgoers milling nearby. "Perhaps we could speak privately," Delia's heart raced. "Has there been news, of a sort?" "Not here, though." They walked to a quiet spot behind the church, where a lone cottonwood provided shade. Delia tried to read Brent's expression, but his face revealed nothing. "I received a telegram from the sheriff in Sacramento yesterday," he said finally. "He found records of a Harold Jennings boarding a steamer for San Francisco the same day you arrived there, 3 months ago." Delia absorbed this information slowly. "He left before I even reached Sacramento." Brent nodded grimly. The purser remembered him because he paid extra for a private cabin, said he'd struck it rich in the Nevada silver fields, and was headed to San Francisco to invest his fortune. A hollow laugh escaped her. "Harold never saw a Nevada mine. He was using the money from my dowry funds my father provided for our establishment here." The full impact of his betrayal washed over her. "He planned to abandon us all along. The promises to send for us were just to buy time for his escape." "I'm sorry, Delia," Brent said softly. "The San Francisco police are looking for him, but that city's full of men reinventing themselves, and he may have continued on Australia, South America." "It doesn't matter anymore," Delia said, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. "Billy and I have made a life here without him. Knowing he chose to leave rather than meeting with some accident, it's almost a relief. At least now I can stop wondering." Billy squirmed in her arms, his face scrunching with displeasure at being ignored. Brent reached out hesitantly. "May I?" Delia handed him the baby, watching as the sheriff's large hands cradled her son with unexpected tenderness. Billy studied this new person with solemn concentration before breaking into a gummy smile. "He has your eyes," Brent observed. "Everyone says that." Delia smiled despite her troubled thoughts, "though Martha insists he has my stubborn chin as well." "Smart woman, Martha." Brent's gaze shifted from the baby to Delia. "What will you do now? Return to Boston?" The question startled her. "Boston? No, I haven't considered leaving Ely." The thought of departing felt strangely like another abandonment. "My position at the school is secure, and Billy is thriving here." Relief flickered across Brent's face. "I'm glad to hear that. The town would be poorer without you both." Something in his tone made Delia's cheeks warm. "Sheriff Mackenzie, are you speaking officially or personally?" A hint of his rare smile appeared. "Both, Mrs. Jennings. Definitely both." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Billy let out a demanding cry, breaking the spell. "He's hungry," Delia said, taking him back. "I should return to the boarding house." Brent nodded, stepping back. "Of course. But Delia," she paused, looking up at him, "now that you know about Harold, perhaps we could dispense with some formalities. I'd like to call on you properly if you're willing." Her heart stuttered. "Brent, I'm still married in the eyes of the law." "Abandoned wives can file for divorce after a year in Nevada territory," he replied. "It's more progressive than eastern states that way." The implications of his knowledge on this specific legal point were not lost on Delia. He had researched this, considered her situation carefully. "That would be quite the scandal," she said, though not with outright refusal. "Ely has larger concerns than divorce proceedings," Brent countered. "And you deserve a chance at happiness after what Harold did." Happiness. Such a simple word for such a complex aspiration. Delia had come west seeking security and family unity, never imagining she would find herself contemplating divorce and a new relationship in this dusty frontier town. "I need time," she said finally. "Take all you need," Brent replied. "I'm not going anywhere." The months that followed brought changes to Ely and to Delia's place within it. As summer heat gave way to the crisp air of autumn, the town continued its growth spurt. New buildings rose along the main street, including a modest brick bank that replaced the wooden structure, a sign of Ely's increasing permanence. Delia moved from Martha's boarding house into a small cottage near the schoolhouse. The rental was another arrangement facilitated by Brent, though he was careful to maintain propriety by conducting all negotiations through Martha and Miss Spencer. 2 rooms and a kitchen, Martha pronounced, inspecting the cottage. Small but clean and close to work. You'll manage fine. The women of Ely helped furnish the tiny home with donated items, a rocking chair from Mrs. Miller, curtains sewn by Mrs. Parker, a sturdy crib crafted by the blacksmith's husband to replace the drawer that had served as Billy's bed. "It's too much," Delia protested when the Ladies' Aid Society delivered these gifts. "Nonsense," replied Mrs. Holcomb, the preacher's wife. "We take care of our own. Our own." The phrase lingered in Delia's mind as she arranged her modest possessions in the cottage. Somehow, in the space of half a year, she had transitioned from desperate outsider to community member. People greeted her by name on the streets, parents trusted her with their children's education, neighbors invited her to share meals and celebrations. Billy flourished as well, growing from a fragile infant into a robust baby who charmed everyone he encountered. At 8 months, he was sitting up independently, babbling constantly, and showing signs of preparing to crawl, developments that filled Delia with pride and occasional exhaustion. Brent kept his word about giving her time, maintaining a respectful distance while making his continued interest clear through small kindnesses, having firewood delivered to her cottage as the weather cooled, bringing books he thought might interest her, stopping by with reports of town developments that inevitably extended into longer conversations. These visits became a highlight of Delia's week, though she was careful to receive him only during daylight hours and with Billy present as chaperone. Despite Ely's relaxed frontier attitudes, she remained conscious of her vulnerable position as a woman of uncertain marital status. As Billy's first birthday approached in late November, Delia found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. A year earlier, she had been a new bride in Boston, blissfully unaware of Harold's true character, excitedly planning for motherhood. Now she was essentially a single mother, a teacher, and a woman contemplating divorce and potential remarriage transformations that would have scandalized her former social circle. The evening before Billy's birthday, a snowstorm descended on Ely, blanketing the town in white silence. Delia had just settled Billy in his crib when a knock sounded at her door. Brent stood on her porch, snowflakes melting in his hair, a package tucked under his arm. "Sheriff," she greeted him, surprised by the late visit, "is everything all right?" "Fine," he assured her, stamping snow from his boots before stepping inside. "Sorry for the hour, but I wanted to deliver this before tomorrow." He handed her the package. "For Billy's birthday." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Delia unwrapped the gift, a small, exquisitely carved wooden horse. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Made it myself," Brent admitted, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "My father taught me whittling, said every child needs something made just for them." Delia looked up at him, seeing beyond the confident sheriff to the man beneath, one who remembered his own childhood lessons, who took time to create something personal for her son. "Thank you, Brent. He'll treasure it." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the soft whistle of wind around the cottage eaves. "Hard to believe he's a year old tomorrow," Brent said finally, glancing toward the small bedroom where Billy slept. "Yes, so much has changed since then." Delia set the carved horse on the mantel, I've been thinking about that a great deal lately, about the changes, about everything. She faced him directly. About Harold and what his abandonment means for Billy and me, about Ely and how it's become home in ways Boston never was. She paused. About you. Brent remained perfectly still as though afraid any movement might break the moment. And what have you decided? That I want to file for divorce. The words felt both terrifying and liberating. As soon as the year of abandonment has passed, which will be in March. I see. His tone revealed nothing. And after, Delia took a deep breath. After, I would be open to considering your attentions if they're still being offered. The transformation of his expression was immediate relief, joy, and something deeper flashing across his features. They are definitely still being offered, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Delia, I've wanted to court you properly since the day you stood up to me at the crossroads. She laughed in surprise. When you rudely informed me that a baby and a dress were all I needed. Not my finest moment, he admitted with a rueful smile, but you didn't crumble. You lifted your chin and faced me down like a queen despite everything you'd been through. He took a step closer. That's when I knew you were special. And here I thought you were the most insufferable man I'd ever encountered, Delia replied, but her tone was warm with affection. First impressions aren't always accurate. Brent reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Though in your case, mine wasn't far wrong. I said you had all you needed, and you've proven that. You've built a life here through your own strength and determination. Delia intertwined her fingers with his, acutely aware that this was the first time they had touched beyond the most casual contact. Not entirely on my own, she corrected softly. I've had help, from Martha, from Miss Spencer, from you. A community supports its own, Brent said, echoing Mrs. Holcomb's words. But you've given as much as you've received, Delia. The school has never been better attended, and half the town's children talk about you at dinner. His praise warmed her, but something in his earlier statement had caught her attention. You said you wanted to court me since that first day, yet you were so brusque, so dismissive. Brent looked slightly embarrassed. Defense mechanism. I recognized something in you, strength, yes, but also vulnerability, it reminded me of. He trailed off. Your wife, Delia prompted gently. He nodded. Emily. She died 12 years ago along with our son, influenza. The pain in his voice, though muted by time, remained evident. I came west afterward, unable to bear the memories. I'm sorry, Delia said, squeezing his hand. Miss Spencer mentioned your loss, but not the details. It was a lifetime ago, Brent replied. I never expected to feel anything like that again. Then you appeared at that crossroads, holding your son with such fierce protectiveness, looking both terrified and determined. He smiled faintly. I couldn't help but compare you to all the broken men who drift through Ely, surrendering to their circumstances. You refused to surrender. I had Billy to think of, Delia said simply. I couldn't afford to fail, and that's exactly what makes you extraordinary. Brent lifted his free hand to her cheek, his touch feather light. Delia Jennings, once your divorce is final, I would very much like to court you with the intention of making you my wife, if that prospect holds any appeal. Her heart raced at his formal declaration, so unexpected yet so welcome. It holds considerable appeal, she replied, matching his serious tone despite the smile tugging at her lips. Though I should warn you that Billy and I come as a package. I wouldn't have it any other way. Brent's gaze was steady, certain. I already care for him as if he were my own. The truth of this statement was undeniable. Brent had shown consistent interest in Billy's development, bringing small gifts, asking after his health, demonstrating infinite patience with the baby's antics during his visits. Then I accept your intention to court me, Delia said, once legal matters are settled. Joy lit his face, transforming his usually stern features. "May I kiss you? Just once to seal our understanding." Instead of answering, Delia rose slightly on her toes, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened, carrying currents of long-suppressed attraction. Brent's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer, while her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. "That was—" Brent began, then shook his head, seemingly at a loss for words. "Yes, it was," Delia agreed, her cheeks flushed. A soft cry from the bedroom interrupted the moment. "Perfect timing," Brent said with a reluctant smile, releasing her. "I should go anyway before the snow gets worse." "Will you come tomorrow? For Billy's birthday, Martha's making a small cake." "Try to keep me away," he replied, reaching for his hat and coat. At the door he paused. "Good night, Delia. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Brent," she whispered as the door closed behind him. As she tended to Billy, Delia felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The path ahead still held challenges: the divorce proceedings, potential gossip, the adjustments of blending their lives together. But for the first time since Harold's betrayal, she allowed herself to envision a future filled with something beyond mere survival. Love, partnership, perhaps even more children someday. Possibilities that had seemed unattainable months ago now shimmered within reach. Winter settled over Ely, transforming the rugged landscape into a pristine wonderland that belied the harsh realities of frontier life. Delia learned new lessons in resilience as temperatures plummeted: how to keep her small cottage warm with limited firewood, how to treat chilblains and frost-nipped fingers, how to navigate snow-choked streets while carrying a growing baby. Brent proved invaluable during these months, ensuring her woodpile remained stocked and checking on her and Billy during the worst storms. Though true courtship remained on hold until her divorce proceedings, their understanding gave their interactions a sweet anticipation that sustained them through the long, cold days. Billy celebrated his first birthday with Martha, Miss Spencer, and Brent gathered around Delia's small table. He smashed his cake with enthusiastic abandon, giggling at the adults' reactions and proudly demonstrating his newest skills: pulling himself to standing, taking wobbly steps while holding furniture, and a small vocabulary of sounds that resembled mama and baba, which Delia chose to interpret as his attempt at Brent. "He's advanced for his age," Miss Spencer declared with professional authority. "Clearly inherits your intelligence, Delia." "And her determination," Brent added, watching as Billy repeatedly attempted to reach a toy just beyond his grasp, refusing to be distracted by easier options. March arrived with warming temperatures and the formal filing of Delia's divorce petition. The legal process proved less scandalous than she had feared. Judge Wilson, who traveled the circuit between several mining towns, reviewed her documentation with businesslike efficiency. "Abandonment for over 12 months, no contact or support provided," he summarized. "Any objections from the community to this dissolution?" Brent, attending in his official capacity as sheriff, shook his head. "None, Your Honor. Mrs. Jennings has established herself as a respected teacher and community member. Her husband's abandonment is well documented." "Very well." The judge stamped the papers with a sense of finality. "Divorce granted on grounds of abandonment. Mrs. Jennings, you may resume your maiden name if desired." "Thank you, but I'll retain Jennings for my son's sake," Delia replied. Outside the makeshift courthouse, Delia stood blinking in the spring sunshine, feeling strangely disoriented. The hearing had lasted less than 30 minutes, yet it had legally severed the relationship that had brought her across the country. "Are you all right?" Brent asked, studying her face with concern. "Yes," she said, realizing it was true. Just contemplating how much has changed in a year. When I married Harold, I thought it was forever, despite my reservations. I never imagined I'd become a divorced woman. Regrets? His tone was careful, neutral. Delia considered the question honestly. About Harold? No. The marriage was a mistake from the beginning, one made from social pressure and limited options. About coming west? Definitely not. She smiled up at him. Some of the best decisions arise from the most difficult circumstances. Relief softened his features. Speaking of decisions, he began, then glanced around at the townspeople moving along the street. Perhaps we could discuss certain matters this evening. I could call on you after Billy's asleep. Her pulse quickened at his formal tone. That would be acceptable. Brent arrived promptly at 7 that evening, freshly shaved and wearing his best shirt under a clean coat. The formality of his appearance, so different from his usual practical attire, confirmed Delia's suspicions about the nature of his visit. "You look lovely," he said as she welcomed him in. She had changed into her Sunday dress, the blue one Mrs. Parker had altered for her months ago, and arranged her hair more carefully than usual. "Thank you." She offered him coffee, which he accepted with uncharacteristic nervousness. They spoke of inconsequential matters, at first the school's preparations for spring examinations, plans for Ely's Independence Day celebrations, Billy's increasing mobility now that he had mastered walking. Finally, Brent set aside his cup and faced her directly. "Delia, I've respected the propriety of waiting until your divorce was final before speaking formally of my intentions." He took a deep breath. "But now that day has arrived, and I find myself struggling to express adequately what you and Billy have come to mean to me. Perhaps actions would serve better than words," Delia suggested gently, moved by his evident emotion. Brent nodded gratefully then, in a gesture that surprised her with its traditional formality, knelt before her chair and took her hand in his. "Delia Jennings, this past year has transformed my life in ways I never anticipated. After Emily died, I convinced myself that portion of my life was finished, that I would serve this town as its sheriff and nothing more." His voice grew husky with feeling. "Then you arrived with nothing but your baby and your dress, and somehow filled all the empty spaces I'd been carrying for years." Tears welled in Delia's eyes at his words, so sincere and unguarded. "I love you," he continued. "I love your strength, your determination, your kindness. I love watching you with Billy, seeing the mother you've become despite every obstacle. I love the way you've embraced Ely and its people, bringing your Eastern refinement without condescension." He reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. "And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that love every day." Inside the box lay a ring, a simple gold band with a small but brilliant diamond, not ostentatious but clearly of quality craftsmanship. "It was my mother's," Brent explained. "I sent for it from Philadelphia last month." "It's beautiful," Delia whispered. "Is that a yes?" Hope illuminated his face. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice strengthening. "Yes, Brent Mackenzie, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, tender yet passionate, filled with shared joy and anticipation of their future together. When they parted, Delia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When I arrived in Ely," she murmured, "you said I had all I needed with just my baby and my dress. I thought you were being cruel." Brent chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "I was being an insensitive fool, perhaps," she conceded. "But in an odd way you were right. Everything essential was there: Billy, who gave me purpose when I might have surrendered to despair, and enough dignity to face whatever came next." She looked up at him. "From those bare beginnings, I found strength I never knew I possessed." "You always had that strength," Brent countered, stroking her cheek. "It just needed circumstances to reveal it." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now," he replied, "you have a community that values you, work that fulfills you, and a man who loves you beyond measure. If you'll permit a romantic declaration from your formerly gruff sheriff." "I believe I'll allow it," Delia said, smiling as she drew him down for another kiss. They married in May, when Ely's surrounding hills bloomed briefly with wildflowers. The entire town attended the ceremony at the small church, followed by a celebration that spilled into the main street. Brent had become a respected fixture in the community during his years as sheriff, and Delia had earned her own place through her work at the school and her quiet dignity in the face of adversity. Billy, now 16 months old and walking confidently, served as unofficial ring bearer, carried down the aisle by Martha, who had become a beloved grandmother figure to the boy. Miss Spencer, standing as Delia's matron of honor, shed uncharacteristic tears during the vows. Deputy Miller, as Brent's best man, beamed with approval throughout the proceedings. "Never thought I'd see the day," he commented during the reception. "Sheriff was the most confirmed bachelor in the territory before you arrived, Mrs. Mackenzie." The new name still felt strange to Delia's ears, but pleasantly so, a symbol of her fresh start, her chosen path rather than one dictated by circumstance or social convention. Their home became Brent's house at the edge of town, a modest but solidly built structure with a proper bedroom for Billy, a small study lined with Brent's surprising collection of books, and a kitchen large enough for Delia to indulge her newfound interest in Western cooking techniques. Married life brought adjustments for them both. Brent, accustomed to solitary bachelor habits, had to learn the rhythms of family life, meals at regular hours, quieter mornings to accommodate Billy's nap schedule, the constant presence of toys and childish paraphernalia. Delia, raised in formal Eastern society, adapted to frontier practicalities, heating water for bathing on the stove, preserving food for winter months, treating minor injuries and illnesses without easy access to doctors. Yet these adjustments paled against the joy of building their life together. Brent proved a devoted husband and an enthusiastic father figure to Billy, who quickly began calling him Pa, a development that brought tears to Brent's eyes the first time it happened. "He couldn't have chosen a better man to call father," Delia said, watching them play together on the floor of their parlor one evening, building towers of wooden blocks for Billy to gleefully demolish. "I hope I'm worthy of the title," Brent replied. "I had so little time with my own son." "You honor his memory every day in how you love Billy," Delia assured him, understanding that part of Brent would always carry the grief of his first family. Rather than feeling threatened by these memories, she embraced them as essential components of the man she had come to love. As Ely continued to grow, Brent and Delia became fixtures in its development. When a proper county courthouse was established in 1878, Brent was appointed the first official judge, a position that recognized his fair-minded approach to law enforcement and allowed him to spend more time at home rather than riding circuit to maintain order. Delia, meanwhile, advanced from assistant to full teacher when Miss Spencer departed for a position at a larger school in Carson City. The one-room schoolhouse expanded to 2 rooms, with Delia overseeing the younger students while a newly arrived male teacher handled the older boys, focused on mining calculations and surveying principles. In the spring of 1879, Delia discovered she was expecting their first child together. The news filled their household with anticipation, especially when the baby, a boy they named Daniel James Mackenzie, arrived healthy and strong in November, with Billy, now nearly 4, proudly assuming the role of big brother. 2 sons, Brent marveled, holding the infant while Billy pressed close to his side, examining his new brother with curious fingers. More than I ever dreamed possible. Our family, Delia agreed, watching them from her bed, her heart full to bursting, built from the most unlikely beginnings. As the years passed, their family continued to grow. A daughter, Emily Martha, joined them in 1881, named for Brent's first wife and their dear friend who had provided such crucial support during Delia's early days in Ely. Another son, Thomas, completed their family in 1884. Billy, who became William officially when he started school, grew into a thoughtful, capable young man who showed Brent's sense of justice and Delia's love of learning. Though he knew the circumstances of his birth, Delia and Brent had agreed on honesty appropriate to his age, he considered Brent his true father in every meaningful sense. By 1890, Ely had transformed from a rough mining town into a proper small city, with brick buildings replacing wooden structures, proper sidewalks instead of muddy paths, and even electric lights in the main business district. The Mackenzie family had transformed as well, from a collection of wounded individuals into a cohesive unit bound by love and shared history. On the morning of their 15th wedding anniversary, Brent found Delia standing on their front porch, watching their children walk to school together. William, now nearly 16, protective of his siblings as they navigated the busy streets. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Mackenzie," Brent said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. Delia leaned into his embrace, still finding comfort in his solid presence after all these years. "I was remembering that day at the crossroads," she admitted. "How desperate I felt, how alone. And now—" he prompted, resting his chin on her shoulder. She turned in his arms, taking in the silver threading his dark hair, the laugh lines deepening around his eyes, the face that had become as familiar and beloved as her own reflection. "Now I know that what looked like an ending was actually the beginning of everything wonderful in my life. Even though I was insufferably rude about your baby and your dress," he teased, referencing a story that had become family legend over the years. "Especially because of that," Delia replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "You challenged me when I needed it most, made me prove to you, to myself, that I was stronger than my circumstances." Brent's arms tightened around her. "I fell in love with you in that moment, you know. When you lifted your chin and faced me down like a queen despite having nothing but your baby and that blue dress." "Not nothing," Delia corrected gently. "Everything that mattered." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching their children disappear around the corner toward school, Delia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From Boston debutante to abandoned wife to respected teacher and beloved wife and mother, each role had shaped her, tested her, ultimately revealing the woman she was meant to become. She had arrived in Ely with nothing but a baby and a dress. She had found not just what she needed, but everything she had never dared to want: love, purpose, community, and the quiet certainty that whatever challenges life might still hold, she would face them with strength, dignity, and the unwavering support of the family she and Brent had forged together from the most unlikely of beginnings.